Hey there, welcome. This is the James Show, News Talk 820 WBAP. Now on FM at 93.3. Let's go. There's never a dull show around here. And one thing that's good about having not ragingly successful foreign policies, there's plenty to talk about here because, you know about the flare-ups that have been going on for the last 3 years in Ukraine and Russia. You know about the flare-ups that have been going on in the Middle East for 5,000 years. But, one of the more recent pains in our foreign policy backside has been a country that used to be cool. They used to be the richest country in Latin America. I'm talking about Venezuela. And they have sort of drifted away from friend territory into downright adversary territory. My first guest is going to help me make some sense of this. This is Dr. Paula Price, author of The Prophet's Dictionary. Welcome to the James Show, Dr. Price. And what's the deal going on with Venezuela? Why do I hear calls to sanction these guys now?
Well, countries rise and fall on their leadership. So when we talk about how they were once friends, it had to do with leadership, and it also had to do with not only their leadership, but our leadership. And to be honest with you, and this is just me making a personal statement, I think that they have joined the bandwagon of let's do away with America. And our president seems to be bent on doing the same thing. So again, countries and relations, diplomatic relations and ties all rise and fall on who's in power at any given point in time.
Well, to get in some of the specifics here, there was something called General License 44. It expired, and for the last 6 months, Venezuela has had some of the sanctions pressure lifted off of them. And now we have a group of Republican leaders in the Senate that want to reinstate those sanctions because they think Venezuela hasn't been behaving as they should in the last 6 months. That's all I know. What else? Is there something else I need to know there, or is that a pretty good summary?
But it's a good summary, and I was reading about it, the General License 44, and what I read was that initially Biden was urged not to even lift that sanction for the 6 months. This was some sort of arbitrary move on his part, obviously, some meetings or whatever, but then he was urged to do it, so he backed off of lifting them entirely and gave them this kind of 6-month probation and see if they behave themselves, then we'll lift the rest of it. Obviously, this country can't behave themselves because this particular leader has some very fixed objectives in mind. And so what they want is for America to from the article I read, they want to leverage America's favor for what they want to do in the international community. So therefore, he pretended to behave himself till whatever his pressure points were got the better of him. And so Biden doesn't want to put these sanctions on because there is something we all know. There's always some deal in the back room, under the table or something. And the Republicans are saying, no, we need to we need to reinstate the original sanction plan because this man is not going to conform.
Yeah, I get the same feeling, too. The guy listening to us probably has the same feeling. What's going on in the back room that we don't know about? And, some of them are obvious. We know if there may be some shady connections with all the foreign policy moves toward Ukraine because someone was getting millions of dollars. Some of the shady stuff he's done around China, there's an air of suspicion around that because, his son has gotten money from China. But I don't think we have any connection like that between a hunter or anything that's sort of a backroom deal that we know about between the Democrats or more specifically the Bidens and Venezuela, do we?
Well, I haven't read anything about it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. What I do know about this president, if I can make this statement, is that I got it from here in Oklahoma that there is this rumor that he has to, well, whoever's in power, has to 2029 to empty America's coffers. The whole thing, even these huge Ukraine payoffs, it's all about emptying our coffers. We cannot afford this, but we also can't afford a war. And so we're kind of, between that, the Iran-Israeli thing, but the consensus here is that the whole thing is Biden is to empty our coffers so that we are beholden to whoever is holding the final ink on the deed to America can finally step in and take possession.
I find there's another suspicious thread between some of the foreign policy flare-ups that we have now. If you add Venezuela to the existing mix of what's going on in the Middle East, Iran and whatnot, and then also the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We're talking about three of the biggest oil-producing regions outside of the United States. We're all having problems with them right now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And think about, even our allies with Israel. One of the things that I've read, because I kind of study this a lot, is that the last stages of a nation's takeover has to do with getting it into a war where they defend a weaker ally. And because, I kind of use it, since I am a preacher, I kind of liken it to, to David having to go and fight the war to get his people back. While he was off fighting a war, then the enemy came in and snatched his folks, and that even happened in another area. This whole idea, wars are expensive, battles are expensive, but also, friendship and, intervening in other causes, they're very costly. This whole thing is to drain our coffers. That I do know. And a broke country is a country up for sale.
Wow, I like the sound of all that. Thanks. You have to come back on the show. Dr. Paula Price, author of Prophet's Dictionary. Thanks for being on the James Show.
Thank you.
Right? And when we talk about, the life cycle of empires and how they all share some commonalities on the way up the ladder and they share some commonalities on the way down the ladder. You think you don't want to be on the way down. You do. This is the fun part. We get to spend all the money on ourselves and we get to spend our money on ourselves. And then the future, we get to borrow against it and spend it on ourselves. And the collapse, that'll be our kids' problem. But we're going to have a blast. This is the James Show. What do you think we should do about that situation in Venezuela, if anything? 800-288-9227, 800-288-WBAP. I'll give you my thoughts. I have a solution. No one's listening to me, but I'll tell you next. This is News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. Hey there, welcome. This is the James Show, News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. Thanks for hanging out. So what do we do about Venezuela? This is a new flashpoint. This is a new, all of a sudden, we've been minding our own business. Well, actually, we've been minding the business of Ukraine and Russia and the Middle East or whatever. But we weren't paying attention to Venezuela, and then Venezuela has entered the chat. So what you need to know is we've had sanctions on Venezuela for a while, and they got ratcheted up as Hugo Chavez got even more socially than he was before. Maduro inherited the mess, and Biden decided 6 months ago that he was going to let some of them expire. Give them a little trial, just a little, just 6 months. Let's give it 6 months, and if they can behave and if they can reach all these goals, it's like when you take your phone away from your kid, and it's like, listen, you make your bed, you do all your laundry, you put up the dishes, we can talk about giving you your phone back. Well, we gave Venezuela their phone back. And what they started doing, they started playing games. They started scrolling through social media, just watching TikTok for hours at a time. And so now there's an effort to take Venezuela's phone away again. Now, I tried to add a little more to the mix than what you would just get if you went to your phone and said, hey, tell me about Venezuela. Or you went to Google and type in Venezuela. What's the news there? So I can go through. I have some archives here, but they're light. They're light on Venezuela. The problem with Venezuelan archives is they don't speak English, so this is my Hugo Chavez audio. That's all I got. I have him singing. I don't know why I have this. He's a broadcaster like us. Hugo Chavez had a talk show where he used to talk hours at a time. He's like us. He's just. We're a little different economically speaking, unlike the nuances of our economic policy. And I've never stolen an election or killed political dissidents. But other than that, we're a lot alike, me and that Hugo Chavez. But that's, we can go into a little more detail, General License 44 and what all it's called. But I think this dovetails perfectly, if you were listening to the show yesterday, with what you and I were talking about then, is we have new sanctions coming up. Well, we're doing sanctions against Iran. We're doing sanctions against Gaza. We're doing sanctions against Russia. We're still doing sanctions against Afghanistan after when we pulled out. It didn't, fall the way we wanted it to. So we're sanctioning the snot out of those guys. Are any of these success stories? Are any of these sanctions working? Here's another question. How many countries do we have sanctions on right now? It's not a rhetorical question. I looked it up before the show. 23. Unless the treasury.gov website is lying to me. And it makes sense that this is under the Treasury Department because these are financial restrictions. But are any of these working? The list is there. Mali, we got beef with Mali now. And I'm not saying Mali like Molly. There's a country Mali. That one, Mali. You got a problem with Mali? I didn't know we did. We got sanctions against Nicaragua. Is that getting better over there? Is the situation improving? We have sanctions against Libya. You know, the whole Gaddafi time we had sanctions going on. We lifted them when he started acting right. Now they're back on. Lebanon has sanctions. Iraq, Iran, Russia, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, Syria. Are any of these working? Do we ever stop and even question it? When's the last time you got a review? When's the last time that Fox News or a CNN stopped down and said, hey, man, look at all these sanctions that are finally working. You know, we just cranked it up for a long time, and finally we got the result we wanted. And I speak in such vague terms because sanctions have their own specific intended goal. And look, let's go through the quick history right now, just in recent times, since like your parents were born. Because for me, my study of sanctions in the modern world, my patient zero is Cuba. Because the stated goal of the sanctions on Cuba is regime change. Still is. It was back then. There was an embargo, sanctions, but guess what? Never happened. That's the longest time scale I can find on the sanctions that we've got going. Did it happen? Did Fidel Castro ever lose power? Or did he only strengthen his power? Did Fidel Castro's standard of living decrease? Meaning, did he personally ever suffer from the sanctions? Absolutely not. He lived the lifestyle of a billionaire, had a 270-foot yacht, had all kinds of giant mansions. Didn't get to travel much, but other than that, life was pretty sweet. He didn't miss any meals. His electricity never blinked. So what happened to Fidel Castro after we threw the sanctions on in 1960? He died of natural causes 60 years later, still in power, just handed the baton to his brother. So that didn't work. There's other times that you remember doing sanctions. When the Iranian Revolution happened in 1979, you remember sanctions being slapped down immediately. Jimmy Carter wasn't going to take it. Did it work? Has Iran turned it around in the last 45 years? How old are we? No, they're still there, causing problems. In fact, at a higher scale than they ever have before. They've never launched an attack on Israel from their own airspace before. So not only is it not better, never been worse. Okay, so that one didn't work. Well, then what we did is not only did we sanction Iran, we funded their neighbors, the crazy dictator Saddam Hussein and his war with Iran. And then when he got turned into a bad actor after that war, we sanctioned him. Did it work? Was there regime change from the sanctions? No. What do we have to do? The sanctions didn't do it. We had to go send human beings. We had to go put boots on the ground. We had to send our sons and daughters to go drive up into Bradley, down the streets of Fallujah, pile out the back, and take that whole country over. The sanctions didn't work. The military worked. Oh, the army works. Sanctions don't work. But the sanctions do hurt common people. I think the best example of that would be North Korea. And North Korea is maybe the greatest example of sanctions failure, because this is something that started, in the 50s? And they have a theocratic communist setup. And the grandpa, Kim Il-sung, passed it down to Kim Jong-il, who's, do I have him wrong? Kim Jong-il-sung, BTS, Psy, Gangnam Style, whatever. So 3 generations of theocratic dictators have endured these sanctions and not been knocked out of power. They still live a fantastic life. They have all the luxuries and amenities the modern world has to offer. But their people don't. Their people all wear the same drab gray clothes. They live in the same size house. They have no hope, no future. I mean, it's a prison state. How'd the sanctions help? See, the sanctions only hurt the common people. Yes, Fidel and Hugo are billionaires, and they would be even more wealthy billionaires if they had a better economic system and maybe not the sanctions. Same with Putin. He's a bazillionaire, maybe the richest dude on the planet. But the lowest in those societies, those are the ones that are suffering. Those are the ones that are eating zoo animals. And I don't want to just fluff off sanctions like they don't do anything. No, they do something. It's just they hurt the common people, and they don't knock the dictator out of power. What happens is when you have a common people that are less wealthy and they have fewer resources, it actually makes it harder for a revolution to happen. If they're worried about their next meal, then they're not worried about overthrowing the government. It almost seems to strengthen and calcify dictators. In fact, if there's one thing you can do to make a dictatorship with horrible governing results last as long as possible, put some sanctions on them. That'll stifle a whole bunch of coups right there. No, I don't have money to buy some extra bullets for our AKs, Vladimir. I don't think we're going to be overthrowing the dictator of Belarus this month. And it's bad for the zoo animals, too. But no, the sanctions actually cause so much pain, so much suffering, so much degradation of the standard of living of the common people in the countries that are being sanctioned. Oh, I take them very serious. I consider them act of war. Actually, what do you think? 800-288-WBAP, 800-288-9227. I want you to remind you to download our free WBAP app. And also, I noticed almost 20% of the people who listen to the podcast listen on an Alexa. I hope I didn't just trigger yours, but I thought that was cool too. Anyway, it's the James Show, News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. Hey there, welcome. This is the James Show, News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. You know, sometimes you look back at history and you wonder how these bad ideas, not only do people come up with them, and not only how do they get instituted, but how do they persist for so long. And this is how I feel about sanctions. Now, I'm not totally anti-sanctions. I just have problems finding where in history that they have worked, or they've worked in their intended target. I mean, they do something. They cause a lot of poverty. They cause a lot of grief. They slow down the gears of, dare I say, progress. But when we have Republican lawmakers calling for new sanctions against Venezuela because they're acting up, okay, look, I'm not saying I'm pro-Venezuela. I'm not saying they haven't been acting up. I'm just saying, are we sure this is going to work? Are we sure this is going to have the intent that you're telling us it is going to have? And this isn't happening in a vacuum. We have just a dumpster fire of foreign policy going on in the last few years. I'm not saying it's all Biden's fault, but I mean, he is the guy at the top right now. And sanctions far predated Joe Biden showing up here. Trump used sanctions. Obama used sanctions. George Bush used sanctions. We've been using sanctions since, our entire lives. Now, it's ramped up as of late because we do this kind of mealy-mouth thing where we do these acts of war, but we act like our hands are clean. Sanctions are an act of war. Spying on people is an act of war. Bombing people is an act of war. But we do all these things. And we're just such big bullies in the world that no one can really stand up to us. But the point isn't whether or not it's right or wrong. The point is, does it work? So I did some digging. And sometimes I find it scary and sometimes I find it soothing when I see two far on the spectrum apart outlets coming to the same conclusion. The Hoover Institution, very conservative, almost to the point of libertarian. They did a write-up on why they think economic sanctions don't work. And this is a position they've held for the last at least 30 years. I found a paper going back to 1998 from these guys talking about how the sanctions aren't working. No, we don't need to do more. I found a write-up from, I know, dare I say it, because I'm really going to give them heck later in the show, but NPR. Oh, no, not NPR. But NPR did a write-up in 2023, how sanctions don't work. Now, they're funny because, you always think NPR, anything that gives the elites more control and power and strings to pull. Their headline is adorable because I think they went into this story with the intent of showing how sanctions can work if done right. And they couldn't find a good example of sanctions working. So the headline says, why sanctions don't work, but could if done right. Stop it. You're arguing with the conclusion in your story in the headline. And you will probably get a nice little chuckle out of it to learn that the only instance of sanctions working that they found were Obama's sanctions in 2011 and against Iran. Yeah, that really worked. Iran's they're all above board now, not causing any problems because here they are like a year later. This was written April 11th of last year, and they're talking about what a great success story Iran has been in the sanctions working, and they're over here doing something never done, launched an attack against Israel from their own territory. Wow, that aged like milk. But the point still stands. NPR, far left outlet, and there's no arguing with that anymore. We'll cover that in a minute. Hoover Institution, far right outlet. Even both of those people go in, did their own little study, and decided that sanctions don't work. Here's the tough part. Both sides of the political spectrum, as far as the parties, still do it. Your think tanks aren't telling you to do this. You're not doing this because it works. You're not doing this because it's record of success over the span of history. Why are you doing it? I don't know. I don't know why this horrible idea persists. I'm having a hard time finding some people that are making the case for it. But I had someone calling me yesterday. Here's what we need to do. We need to sanction the snot out of Iran. That's how we respond to their attack on Israel. Well, what does that do? Has that ever knocked anyone out of power? Has that ever done anything but make poor people suffer? In the 23 states that we are admittedly sanctioning right now, how is any of it working? Has Burma turned around? Has Burma gone through a period of self-reflection and says, oh no, I can't use the SWIFT banking system anymore. Guess we'll overthrow our dictator and institute a constitutional liberal democracy. No, they're not. In fact, I'm just telling you, I can't find where this has ever worked. And I know a lot of times I act like I have all the answers here. I really don't have the answer. Why does this happen? I don't know. And this frustrates the heck out of me. I'm supposed to know this stuff. In fact, I spend a big chunk of my day trying to figure out the answer to that so I can tell you, and I'm coming to you empty-handed. And it's still like the de facto policy preference of both parties in Washington. Why? I don't know. If anyone has an answer, please enlighten me, because I looked for it and I couldn't find it. 800-288-WBAP, 800-288-9227. Coming up next, Jennifer Hargrave talking about maybe your love life isn't killing it in marriage. Is that going to kill your marriage? Maybe. Stick around. That's next. News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3.